Alright, welcome back to Playing God, the Art of Gaming, everybody. This week it's Tori here to talk to you guys about how to draw Cortana from the Halo series. Alright, well, as you all know, Cortana has several different forms and looks pretty different in just about every game. You may also know that finding a viable reference for her is complete and total hell. Or maybe you don't. So let me be the first to say that finding a good reference for Cortana is really difficult. I didn't realize this going into the sketch, so you'll probably see me click on the computer a few times as I look at different references. I ended up drawing a version of Cortana that looks like her, but is an amalgamation of several of her appearances with a heavy emphasis on the Halo 4 Cortana. You may notice that in the sketch that I used a skeleton the same way that Steph did for her Link drawing. This is to get the motion of the pose down. It's important to remember that if you can't capture the rhythm of the pose in the first 3 minutes of drawing, it's likely that you won't capture it at all. I used a line to show the tilt of the shoulders and determine the tilt of the hips. It's very common when drawing people to have a contrapposto pose, which basically means that the shoulder and the hips are tilted in opposite directions. The picture that I used when I was drawing Cortana is in a traditional contrapposto pose. Cortana is basically nude, which means you don't really have to worry about folds of the clothes or how the forms fit onto the body. Mostly you need to worry about making her anatomy make sense in itself, and be sure to capture the rhythm and continuity of the pose, which basically translates to whenever something curves out on the other side, it will probably curve in. It's like every action there is an equal opposite reaction, but in a picture. So, as per the usual, the next step is line art. Once you've got your sketch all nice and finished to the point that you think taking it on the computer will prove faster or be just the logical next step, you just trace your sketches as both Steph and I have showed you in the past. You use the brush tool on a high stabilizer. As you can see, some of my lines ended up a little bit different from the sketch, which is okay. I'm lining Cortana in a dark blue. That's because there is no black in the image, and having a colored line art adds to the general ambiance of the picture. And for the darker bits of her anatomy, I also used a darker blue color. Alright, at this point, I'm going to show you a completely different way to color. I decided to completely forego the entire step of flat colors. I don't do that first when I color this way, so take everything you know about flats for now and just throw them out the window. I take my magic wand tool and select the entire figure like so, filling in whatever is missed with the selection tool. Then I fill the entire figure on a separate layer with gray, or in this case, a blue color instead of gray, because gray doesn't really exist on someone like Cortana, who is a self-lit computer program. Anyways, on to the shading part! So with this type of coloring, usually what I do is I take a darker shade of whatever the color is massively overlaid on the body, and I start adding shading according to some kind of light source. The chosen light source here, despite the fact that I didn't illustrate it, was at the top right of the corner. It's important to remember what part of the body will be in shadow. For instance, Cortana's neck, hair, and the darker parts of her body and the side of her face facing away from the light will be darker. It's also another important note to note that the brow bone will often create dark shadows over the eye socket, and the sides of the nose will always be a slightly darker value than the top. I then just follow the contours of the body to get the general shadow structure. I do this with step with several shades of blue here to give the shadow more depth and variation. In the initial drawing for Cortana, I actually made her head too big. I didn't realize it until it was way too late, and so this picture is a little bit off, but that's okay. Sometimes your finished product is not as good as it could have been. At this point, I finally decided to fill in the main part of Cortana's hair. What I did was select the shape of the hair with a magic wand tool, grab a fairly dark color, put it on a layer underneath all the layers with the shadows, and turn the shadow layer to a multiply on a lower opacity. I then proceeded to lock all the shadow layers and change their colors to be more red to contrast all the blue. The next thing I did was select all the darker shapes on her body and fill the color underneath the shadows with another dark blue color, as well as the colors for Cortana's skin with a lighter color. I was guessing colors because Cortana has so many different shades of blue that it's easy to just eyeball it. Alright, so at this point in the coloring method, I usually add highlights. I went through and grabbed a light color, set it on a luminosity layer, and started adding highlights wherever the light source was applicable. Then I blurred it to lessen the intensity. I then colored her eyes on a separate layer, giving them a blurred lit effect. Also doing more lighting effects, I took a super light color on a luminosity layer with a very tiny brush. I added lines on various parts of her anatomy, blurred out in some spots. This was to give her a more shimmery, more computery effect. I lastly took a purple shadow and overlaid it on the red ones to give it a more harmonious effect in the colors. And I just called it good from there, and the next thing I did was I was going to take it off into Photoshop. So let's do it. The last step on any picture drawn by me is to pull it into Photoshop and add the background. The background here is another series of dots and a gradation between a light and a darker blue with one of Photoshop's built-in texture overlays. I added my signature, saved it as a PNG because it holds the opacity, and you're done! I hope you enjoyed it. Next week we'll be back with Steph drawing Jinx from League of Legends for you guys. Anyways, bye! Have a good rest of your week!